They said Amanda Smith was too gentle for the cockpit, too compassionate for combat, too weak to handle the raw power of an A-10 Warthog. Her instructors called her soft touch behind her back, convinced she'd never make it as a combat pilot. But on a scorching afternoon in Afghanistan, when 37 Marines were trapped in a valley with enemy fighters closing in from all sides, Amanda's supposed weakness would become their only hope for survival. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special. For youth, alarm shrieked through the barracks at Randolph Air Force Base at 0500 hours, but Amanda Smith was already awake. She'd been lying in her narrow bunk for the past 2 hours, staring at the ceiling and mentally rehearsing emergency procedures. While her roommate Sarah Martinez slept soundly in the next bed, Amanda quietly reviewed aircraft systems, weather patterns, and tactical maneuvers in her mind. At 24, Amanda was older than most of the pilot candidates in the advanced combat training program. The other trainees were fresh-faced 20-year-olds who'd come straight from the Air Force Academy, their confidence as polished as their uniforms. They talked about dogfights and kill ratios with the casual enthusiasm of video game players. Amanda, on the other hand, had taken a different path to get here. She'd grown up in small-town Nebraska, the daughter of a veterinarian and a high school guidance counselor. Her father, Dr. Michael Smith, had taught her to handle injured animals with infinite patience and care. Her mother, Linda Smith, had shown her how to read people's emotions and respond with empathy. These weren't exactly the qualities the Air Force traditionally looked for in combat pilots. Amanda had initially joined the Air Force as a transport pilot, flying cargo runs and medical evacuations. For 3 years, she'd piloted C-130s across the globe, carrying supplies to remote outposts and wounded soldiers to safety. Her record was spotless, not a single incident, not even a hard landing. But that pristine safety record had earned her a reputation that followed her like a shadow. Too careful, too cautious, too soft. The nickname Soft Touch had started during her transport days. Other pilots used it mockingly, suggesting she was too gentle with the aircraft, too concerned about passenger comfort, too hesitant to push the envelope. When she'd applied for combat pilot training, several of her former commanders had quietly suggested she wasn't cut out for the aggressive world of fighter aviation. But Amanda had a dream that wouldn't die. She wanted to fly the A-10 Thunderbolt II, the legendary Warthog that provided close air support to ground troops. The A-10 wasn't glamorous like the F-16 or F-22. It was slow, ugly, and built around a massive 30mm cannon. But it was also the aircraft that saved lives, that provided cover for soldiers when they needed it most. That mission spoke to something deep in Amanda's soul. The advanced combat training program at Randolph was her chance to prove herself. The 6-month course was designed to weed out pilots who couldn't handle the stress and aggression of combat flying. Out of the 42 candidates who'd started the program, only 18 remained after the first month. The instructors were deliberately harsh, pushing students to their breaking points to see who would crack under pressure. Amanda's primary instructor was Colonel James Morrison, a veteran pilot with 20 years of combat experience and a reputation for being absolutely ruthless with trainees. Morrison had flown F-16s over Iraq during the Gulf War and had zero tolerance for what he called soft pilots. He'd made it clear from day one that he didn't think Amanda belonged in the program. Morrison had said during her first evaluation, "You fly like you're carrying a load of crystal. This is combat training, not a Sunday drive through the countryside. The enemy isn't going to wait for you to politely ask permission to engage." The criticism stung because it echoed every doubt Amanda had about herself. Maybe she was too gentle. Maybe her careful approach was a weakness rather than a strength. Maybe she should have stayed in transport aviation where her cautious nature was valued rather than criticized. But Amanda's background had taught her something her younger classmates didn't understand: the weight of responsibility. When she'd flown medical evacuations, she'd carried wounded soldiers whose lives depended on her skill and judgment. When she'd delivered supplies to remote bases, she'd known that her cargo might be the difference between life and death for the troops. On the ground, that kind of responsibility had shaped her into a pilot who thought before she acted, who considered consequences before pulling the trigger. The other trainees didn't see it that way. They saw Amanda's deliberate approach as hesitation, her careful planning as fear. During flight exercises, they would dive into combat scenarios with aggressive enthusiasm, while Amanda would take precious seconds to assess the situation, identify all targets, and plan her approach. By the time she engaged, the exercise was often over. "She's too slow," Amanda overheard fellow trainee Mark Johnson telling his friends after a particularly challenging air-to-ground exercise. In real combat, that hesitation would get people killed. "She's thinking like a transport pilot, not a fighter pilot." The comments hurt, but they also fueled Amanda's determination. She knew she was different from the other trainees, but she wasn't convinced that was necessarily a bad thing. Her transport experience had taught her that every mission was about protecting lives, not just taking them. She'd seen the faces of the soldiers she'd carried, had heard their stories, had understood that her job was to bring them home safely. That perspective shaped everything about how Amanda approached flight training. While other pilots focused on speed and aggression, Amanda focused on precision and planning. While they practiced quick target engagement, she practiced identifying friend from foe in complex scenarios. While they celebrated successful strikes, she studied the aftermath, analyzing what could have been done better. The A-10 Warthog was the perfect aircraft for Amanda's methodical approach, though she didn't realize it yet. Unlike sleek fighter jets that relied on speed and maneuverability, the A-10 was built for close air support. It was designed to fly low and slow, to loiter over battlefields, to provide sustained cover for ground troops. The A-10 pilot's job wasn't to engage in dogfights or launch missiles from beyond visual range. It was to get close to the action, identify targets precisely, and provide accurate fire support without hitting friendly forces. But the training program wasn't designed around the A-10's unique mission. Instead, it emphasized the aggressive, fast-paced combat style that worked for air superiority fighters. Amanda found herself constantly evaluated on criteria that didn't match her strengths or the aircraft she hoped to fly. During weapons training, instructors would time how quickly pilots could acquire and engage targets. Amanda's scores were consistently lower than her classmates, not because she couldn't hit the targets, but because she took extra time to verify her shots. In air-to-air combat exercises, she struggled to keep up with the rapid pace that favored quick decisions over careful analysis. "Smith, you're thinking too much," Morrison told her after a particularly frustrating training session. Combat is about instinct, about reacting faster than the enemy can think. You can't analyze every decision to death. But Amanda's overthinking came from a different place than fear or indecision. It came from understanding that every bullet fired, every bomb dropped, every tactical decision had consequences that extended far beyond the immediate target. Her veterinarian father had taught her that healing required patience and precision. Her guidance counselor mother had shown her that understanding people's motivations was more important than judging their actions. These lessons didn't translate obviously to combat aviation, but they had shaped Amanda into a pilot who saw the bigger picture. Where other trainees saw targets to be destroyed, Amanda saw a complex battlefield where friendly forces, civilians, and enemy combatants were all mixed together. Where they saw opportunities for quick strikes, she saw situations that required careful analysis to avoid tragic mistakes. The training program's emphasis on speed and aggression was beginning to take its toll on Amanda's confidence. She'd always been a strong pilot, but the constant criticism was making her second-guess every decision. She found herself trying to fly like her classmates, attempting to adopt their aggressive style, but it felt unnatural and forced. Her roommate, Sarah, who was excelling in the program, tried to offer encouragement. "You're one of the best pilots I've ever seen," Sarah told her one evening as they prepared for another day of training. "You just need to trust your instincts more. Stop overthinking everything." But Amanda's instincts were to think, to analyze, to consider all possibilities before acting. That's what had kept her alive during 3 years of transport missions in dangerous areas. That's what had earned her the trust of the medical teams and ground commanders who depended on her. But in the competitive environment of combat pilot training, those same instincts were being labeled as weaknesses. As the first month of training drew to a close, Amanda found herself questioning whether she belonged in the program. The other trainees were improving rapidly, adapting to the fast-paced combat environment with apparent ease. Amanda, despite her technical skills and safety record, was struggling to keep up with their aggressive style. She sat alone in the base chapel one Sunday morning, staring at the simple wooden cross and wondering if she should withdraw from the program. Maybe Morrison was right. Maybe she was too soft for combat aviation. Maybe her careful, methodical approach was a liability in the life-and-death world of air combat. But deep down, Amanda knew that her approach wasn't about being weak or afraid. It was about being responsible. It was about understanding that the power to rain death from above came with the obligation to use that power wisely. It was about remembering that every decision in the cockpit affected real people on the ground, soldiers who were counting on her to keep them safe. The question was whether the Air Force would ever value that perspective, or whether Amanda would wash out of the program before she had a chance to prove that. Sometimes thinking too much was exactly what the mission required. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Amanda's fascination with the A-10 Warthog had begun 3 years earlier during a medical evacuation mission in Syria. She'd been piloting a C-130 Hercules, carrying wounded soldiers from a forward operating base back to a military hospital in Germany. The flight had been routine until her radio crackled with an urgent transmission from the ground. "Dustoff 77. This is Phantom 6. The voice had been strained, filled with the kind of controlled panic that came from being under fire. "We've got troops in contact. Heavy casualties. Need immediate close air support at grid November 742. Amanda had listened to the radio chatter as she flew her wounded cargo to safety. The ground commander was calling for any available aircraft to provide cover for his pinned-down soldiers. F-16s were too far away. Apache helicopters were grounded due to weather, and the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Then she'd heard it, the distinctive sound that would change her life forever. A low, rumbling roar that seemed to shake the very air around her aircraft. Through her cockpit window, she'd seen it. And a 10 Thunderbolt II, flying low and slow toward the battle zone. The aircraft looked like something from another era, with its straight wings, twin engines mounted high on the fuselage, and massive nose cannon that gave it the appearance of a flying tank. "Phantom 6, this is Hog 2-1, came the calm voice of the A-10 pilot. "I've got eyes on your position. Marking targets now." What followed was a masterclass in precision warfare. The A-10 pilot had spent nearly 20 minutes over the battlefield, methodically identifying enemy positions, coordinating with ground forces, and delivering devastating but surgical strikes. Amanda had watched from her higher altitude as the Warthog made pass after pass, its 30mm GAU-8 cannon creating distinctive bursts of fire that eliminated threats while avoiding friendly forces. "Phantom 6, area is clear. Your boys can move now," the A-10 pilot had finally announced. "Hoven 2-1, You just saved 37 lives down here." "Thank you," the ground commander had responded, his voice thick with emotion. That moment had crystallized everything Amanda wanted to do with her military career. She didn't want to be a transport pilot forever, carrying the wounded after the battle was over. She wanted to be the pilot who prevented those wounds in the first place, who provided the protective umbrella that kept soldiers safe. She wanted to fly the aircraft that could loiter over a battlefield for hours, that could distinguish between friend and foe, that could deliver precise fire support when and where it was needed most. The A-10 wasn't just an aircraft, it was a philosophy of warfare that aligned perfectly with Amanda's values. While other fighter jets were designed for speed and air superiority, the Warthog was built for one purpose: protecting ground troops. It was slow enough to see the battlefield clearly, tough enough to survive ground fire, and accurate enough to engage targets within meters of friendly forces. But pursuing that dream meant qualifying for combat aviation, which meant surviving the Advanced Combat Training Program. And 3 weeks into the program, Amanda was discovering that her methodical approach was being interpreted as weakness by instructors who valued aggression over precision. The turning point came during a complex air-to-ground exercise designed to simulate close air support. The scenario involved friendly forces pinned down by enemy positions in a simulated urban environment. Pilots had to identify hostile targets while avoiding civilian structures and friendly forces scattered throughout the area. Amanda's classmates approached the exercise with typical enthusiasm. Mark Johnson dove into the target area, engaging multiple positions with rapid-fire enthusiasm. His attack was spectacular and completely wrong. In his eagerness to engage targets, he'd failed to properly coordinate with the ground controller and had struck 2 buildings that were designated as civilian shelters. "Negative impact, Johnson," the exercise controller announced. "You just took out a school and a hospital. Mission failure." Jennifer Walsh, another top performer in the class, had a different approach. She'd identified the targets quickly and engaged them with textbook precision. Her strikes were accurate and effective, neutralizing the threats in under 3 minutes. But she'd also missed a key element of the scenario: enemy reinforcements that had been moving toward the friendly positions during her attack. "Walsh, good target engagement, but you failed to maintain situational awareness. Enemy forces overran the friendly position while you were focused on your initial targets. Partial mission failure." One by one, Amanda watched her classmates tackle the exercise. Each brought their own strengths: speed, aggression, technical precision, but each also made critical errors that would have cost lives in a real scenario. The exercise was designed to be nearly impossible, testing pilots' ability to balance multiple priorities under intense pressure. When Amanda's turn came, she approached the exercise differently. Instead of diving immediately into the target area, she spent precious seconds studying the battlefield layout, identifying not just the enemy positions but the friendly forces, civilian areas, and potential escape routes. She coordinated extensively with the ground controller, confirming target locations and establishing clear communication protocols. "Smith, you're burning time," Morrison's voice crackled through her headset. "Those troops are taking fire. Move." But Amanda continued her methodical approach. She identified 3 primary threat locations and 2 secondary positions. More importantly, she noticed something her classmates had missed: a pattern in the enemy positions that suggested they were trying to funnel the friendly forces into a kill zone. Instead of engaging the most obvious targets first, Amanda targeted the flanking positions that would allow the enemy to surround the friendly forces. Her first strike eliminated a machine gun nest that none of her classmates had even identified. Her second strike took out a mortar position that had been hidden behind a civilian building. "Hog 7-7, you're cleared hot on the primary targets," the ground controller announced, but Amanda had already moved on to the real threat. She'd identified an enemy command post that was coordinating the attack on the friendly forces. It was a difficult target, partially concealed, close to civilian structures, and requiring a precision strike to avoid collateral damage. The shot required her to approach from a specific angle, threading her attack between two civilian buildings, while avoiding a friendly patrol that was moving through the area. It was exactly the kind of complex engagement that required patience, precision, and careful timing, all the qualities that Morrison had criticized as weaknesses. Amanda lined up her approach, coordinated with the ground controller to ensure friendly forces were clear, and delivered a single precise strike that eliminated the command post. The effect was immediate. Without coordination, the enemy positions became vulnerable to the advancing friendly forces. Outstanding work. Hog 7-7, the ground controller announced. Threat neutralized. Friendly forces are advancing. Mission complete. The exercise had taken Amanda nearly twice as long as her classmates, but she'd achieved something none of them had managed: a complete mission success with 0 friendly casualties and no collateral damage. More importantly, she demonstrated the kind of tactical thinking that made the A-10 such an effective close air support platform. After the exercise, Amanda found herself in Morrison's office, uncertain whether she was about to be praised or punished. The colonel sat behind his desk, reviewing her performance scores with an unreadable expression. "Smith," he finally said, "that was either the best demonstration of tactical awareness I've seen from a trainee, or the luckiest accident in Air Force history." Amanda remained silent, unsure how to respond. "You took too long to engage," Morrison continued. "In a real scenario, those friendly forces would have been taking casualties while you were conducting your analysis. Time is a luxury you don't have in combat." The criticism stung, but Amanda had expected it. She demonstrated exactly the kind of careful, methodical approach that had been criticized throughout her training. "However," Morrison added, and Amanda caught a hint of something different in his tone, "you're the only pilot who identified all the threat positions. You're the only one who understood the enemy's tactical plan. And you're the only one who completed the mission without any friendly casualties." He leaned back in his chair, studying Amanda with new interest. "Tell me, Smith, why do you want to fly the A-10? The question caught Amanda off guard. She'd expected more criticism, not a philosophical discussion about her career goals. "Sir, I want to be the pilot who brings soldiers home safely," she said. "I want to fly the aircraft that can stay over the battlefield long enough to really understand what's happening, that can provide the kind of precise support that saves lives rather than just taking them." Morrison nodded slowly. "The A-10 is a different kind of aircraft, Smith. It's not about speed or glamour. It's about staying power, about being able to loiter over a battlefield for hours, about having the patience to wait for the right shot and the skill to make it count. Most pilots don't have the temperament for that kind of mission." He pulled out a different file, one that Amanda hadn't seen before. "This is the A-10 training pipeline. It's a separate track from the General Combat Pilot Program. The selection criteria are different, the training is different, and the mission is different. Most pilots who succeed in the A-10 program wouldn't do well in air superiority fighters, and vice versa." Amanda felt her heart rate increase. This was the opportunity she'd been hoping for, the chance to train specifically for the mission that called to her. "Sir, I'd like to apply for the A-10 program," she said. Morrison smiled for the first time since she'd known him. "I thought you might. Your performance today tells me you understand what close air support is really about. It's not about being the fastest or the most aggressive. It's about being the most precise, the most patient, and the most reliable when soldiers on the ground need someone they can count on." He signed a form and handed it to her. "This is your transfer to A-10 training at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona. You'll be working with instructors who understand that sometimes Thinking too much is exactly what the mission requires. As Amanda left Morrison's office, she felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. She was finally getting the chance to pursue her dream of flying the Warthog, but she was also leaving behind the familiar world of general combat training for something completely unknown. That evening, she called her parents to share the news. Her father, with his veterinarian's understanding of precision and patience, was proud but not surprised. "You've always been the kind of person who thinks before acting," he said. "It sounds like you've found the right place for that approach." Her mother, the guidance counselor, had different insight. "You know, Amanda, sometimes what the world calls a weakness is just a strength that hasn't found its proper place yet. It sounds like you're about to find yours." As Amanda packed her belongings for the transfer to Arizona, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The criticism she'd received, the doubts she'd faced, the sense that she didn't fit the traditional mold of a combat pilot, all of it had led to this moment. She didn't know what challenges awaited her at Davis-Monthan, but she knew she was finally heading toward the aircraft and mission that matched her values. The A-10 Warthog wasn't just a plane. It was a philosophy of warfare that prioritized precision over speed, patience over aggression, and protecting lives over taking them. For the first time since joining the combat pilot program, Amanda felt like she was heading in the right direction. Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona was a different world from Randolph. The desert landscape stretched endlessly in every direction, broken only by the distinctive silhouettes of hundreds of A-10 Warthogs lined up on the tarmac. This was the home of the 355th Wing, the Air Force's premier A-10 training unit, and Amanda had never felt more intimidated or more excited that her new instructor was Major Lisa Chun, a veteran A-10 pilot with over 2,000 combat hours in Afghanistan and Iraq. Unlike Morrison's aggressive demeanor, Chun projected quiet confidence and methodical precision. She was exactly the kind of pilot Amanda hoped to become, someone who understood that the A-10's power came not from speed or flash, but from patience and accuracy. "Welcome to the Boneyard, Smith," Chun said as they walked across the flight line on Amanda's first day. The nickname referred to the nearby aircraft storage facility where decommissioned military planes were kept, but it had become synonymous with the entire base. "You're here because someone thinks you have what it takes to fly the Warthog in combat. My job is to find out if they're right." The A-10 training program was structured differently from conventional fighter training. Instead of emphasizing air-to-air combat and high-speed maneuvers, the curriculum focused on close air support tactics, target identification, and coordination with ground forces. It was exactly what Amanda had been hoping for, a program that valued her methodical approach rather than criticizing it. For the first 3 weeks, Amanda excelled in ground school. She mastered the A-10 systems with the same thoroughness she'd applied to her transport aircraft. She studied close air support procedures, memorized radio protocols, and learned to read battlefield maps with the precision of a surgeon studying anatomy. Her written test scores were among the highest in her class, but flying the A-10 was different from studying it. The aircraft was unlike anything Amanda had ever experienced. The cockpit was built around the massive U-8 cannon, with controls and displays arranged to give the pilot maximum awareness of the battlefield below. The twin engines, mounted high on the fuselage, provided redundancy and survivability, but also created unique handling characteristics. Amanda's first flights were basic orientation missions, learning to taxi the aircraft, understanding its flight characteristics, and getting comfortable with the cockpit layout. She approached these flights with her characteristic thoroughness, spending extra time on pre-flight inspections and taking detailed notes on every aspect of the aircraft's performance. "Smith, you're treating this like a science experiment," Chun observed after Amanda's third training flight. "The A-10 is a tool, not a puzzle to be solved. You need to develop an intuitive feel for the aircraft, not just an intellectual understanding." The criticism was familiar, but Amanda tried to take it constructively. She knew she had a tendency to overanalyze, but that approach had served her well in transport aviation. She hoped it would eventually translate to combat flying as well. Real test came during her first leave-fire exercise. The scenario was relatively simple. Engage a series of ground targets in a controlled environment, using the A-10's 30mm cannon. It was designed to be an introduction to the aircraft's primary weapon system, a chance for new pilots to experience the incredible power of the Go-8. Amanda prepared for the mission with her usual meticulous attention to detail. She studied the target area, memorized the radio frequencies, and reviewed the engagement procedures until she could recite them from memory. She arrived at the aircraft 2 hours early, conducting an exhaustive pre-flight inspection that covered every rivet and wire. Smith, the aircraft was inspected by the crew chief this morning, Chun said as she watched Amanda examining the cannon system for the third time. You're not going to find anything wrong with it. But Amanda couldn't help herself. Flying was about managing risk, and she'd learned that thorough preparation was the best way to minimize unexpected problems. She checked and double-checked every system, every control, every instrument. When they finally took off, Amanda felt confident and prepared. The A-10 responded predictably to her inputs, and the flight to the target area was smooth and uneventful. She established communication with the range control officer, received clearance to engage, and began her approach to the first target. That's when everything went wrong. The first target was a simulated tank positioned on a hillside about 2,000 meters from Amanda's initial position. It should have been a straightforward engagement. Identify the target, line up the shot, and fire a short burst from the cannon. Amanda had practiced the procedure dozens of times in the simulator, but as she approached the target, Amanda found herself overwhelmed by the complexity of the real environment. The simulator had been clean and controlled, with clear target identification, and no distractions. The real world was chaotic and confusing, with multiple potential targets, varying terrain, and constantly changing perspective as the aircraft moved. Amanda identified what she thought was the target tank, but as she lined up for the shot, she noticed other objects in the area that hadn't been briefed. Were they additional targets? Obstacles to avoid? Friendly forces that hadn't been mentioned in the briefing. HOV 2-1, you're cleared hot on the primary target, the range controller announced. Amanda hesitated. She could see the target tank clearly now, but her mind was processing dozens of other variables. Wind conditions, aircraft altitude, cannon ballistics, potential ricochets, background terrain, all the factors that could affect the shot's accuracy and safety. HOG 2-1, say status, the controller called again. Amanda tried to focus on the primary target, but her analytical mind kept identifying potential complications. What if she missed? What if the rounds overpenetrated? What if there were range safety issues she hadn't considered? HOV 2-1, you need to engage now or abort the pass. Chun's voice came through the intercom, calm but firm. Amanda finally squeezed the trigger, but her hesitation had cost her the optimal firing position. The burst of 30mm rounds kicked up dirt near the target, but failed to achieve a direct hit. The engagement window closed as the aircraft passed beyond effective range. HOG 2-1, negative impact. Come around for another pass, the range controller announced. Amanda felt her stomach drop. Missing the target wasn't just a training failure. It was a fundamental breakdown of the pilot's most basic responsibility. In combat, that miss could mean the difference between life and death for ground forces depending on her support. Second pass was worse. Amanda's confidence was shaken, and she found herself second-guessing every decision. She approached the target area too high, failed to account for wind drift, and delivered another ineffective burst that scattered harmlessly in the dirt. HOG 2-1, mission terminated. Return to base. Chun's voice was professionally neutral. But Amanda could hear the disappointment. The flight back to Davis-Monthan was the longest 20 minutes of Amanda's life. She'd failed in the most basic way possible. She'd been unable to hit a stationary target in ideal conditions. All her preparation, all her studying, all her meticulous attention to detail had been worthless when it mattered most. After landing, Amanda sat in the debriefing room while Chun reviewed her performance. The Major's analysis was thorough, but devastating. "Smith, you had every advantage possible today," Chun began. "Clear weather, no threat environment, unlimited ammunition, and a target that couldn't shoot back. Yet you failed to achieve a single effective engagement." Amanda stared at her hands, unable to meet Chun's eyes. "Your technical knowledge is excellent," Chun continued. "You know the aircraft systems better than pilots with twice your experience. You understand the theory of close air support better than anyone in your class. But knowledge isn't enough. Combat flying requires the ability to make quick decisions under pressure, to act on incomplete information, to trust your instincts when there's no time for analysis." The words hit Amanda like physical blows. She'd heard similar criticisms before, but this felt different. This wasn't about training exercises or simulated scenarios. This was about her fundamental ability to perform the mission she'd dreamed of flying. "Ma'am, I know I can do better," Amanda said quietly. "I just need more time to time," is exactly what you don't have in combat, Chun interrupted. "Ground forces under fire can't wait for you to analyze every variable. They need immediate, accurate support. Today you demonstrated that you can't provide that support when it matters most." Chun's evaluation was clinical and thorough. Amanda had failed to engage targets effectively, had shown poor situational awareness, and had demonstrated an inability to make timely decisions under pressure. Most damaging of all, she'd shown a lack of confidence that had affected her basic flying skills. "I'm recommending you for additional training," Chun concluded. "You'll repeat this phase of instruction until you can demonstrate consistent target engagement. If you can't improve within 2 weeks, you'll be reassigned to a different aircraft type." The threat was clear. Amanda had 2 weeks to prove she could overcome her analytical paralysis and become an effective A-10 pilot, or her dream of flying the Warthog would be over. That evening, Amanda sat alone in her quarters, staring at the training manuals that had once given her confidence. The failure at the range had shaken her faith in everything she thought she knew about flying. Maybe her critics had been right. Maybe she was too cautious, too analytical, too weak for the demands of combat aviation. She thought about her father's veterinary practice, where careful diagnosis and methodical treatment planning were essential skills. She thought about her mother's guidance counseling, where understanding people's motivations was more important than quick judgments. Those approaches had worked in their civilian careers, but they seemed to be liabilities in the military world. Amanda picked up her phone to call her parents, then put it down. She wasn't ready to explain how completely she'd failed at the thing she'd worked so hard to achieve. Instead, she walked outside and stared at the rows of A-10s parked on the flight line. Each aircraft represented the dreams of a pilot who'd successfully completed the training program. Each one was a reminder of what Amanda might never achieve. Desert night was clear and cold, with stars visible despite the base's lighting. Amanda had always found peace in the night sky, but tonight it felt distant and unreachable. She'd failed her first major test as an A-10 pilot, and she wasn't sure she had the strength or skill to succeed on her second chance. But as she stood there in the darkness, Amanda made a decision. She would not give up. She would find a way to overcome her analytical paralysis and prove that her methodical approach could be a strength rather than a weakness. She had 2 weeks to transform herself from a failed trainee into a competent combat pilot. The question was whether 2 weeks would be enough to overcome a lifetime of careful, methodical thinking. The next 2 weeks at Davis-Monthan became a nightmare of repeated failures and mounting criticism. Amanda threw herself into remedial training with desperate intensity, arriving at the flight line before dawn and staying until well after sunset. She flew training missions twice daily, each one an opportunity to prove she could overcome her analytical paralysis and succeed as an A-10 pilot. But the harder Amanda tried, the worse her performance became. Her second live-fire attempt was a disaster that made her first failure look competent by comparison. This time, the target was a simulated enemy position, a collection of mock bunkers and vehicles arranged in a realistic battlefield scenario. Amanda approached with determination, but as she entered the target area, her mind immediately began cataloging every detail of the environment. She noticed the wind patterns affecting her approach, the shadows that might conceal additional targets, the terrain features that could affect her cannon's ballistics. By the time she'd processed all these variables, she'd flown past the optimal engagement point without firing a single round. "Hog 2-1, you missed your attack window," Chun's voice crackled through the intercom. "Come around for another pass." Amanda's second approach was rushed and sloppy, overcorrecting for her previous hesitation. She fired too early and watched her rounds impact harmlessly in the dirt 200 meters short of the target. Her third pass was no better. She compensated for the short rounds by aiming high and sent her burst sailing over the target entirely. "Exercise terminated," Chun announced. "Return to base." The pattern repeated itself over the following days. Amanda would enter each training scenario with good intentions and solid preparation, but as soon as she faced the complexity of a real engagement, her analytical mind would overwhelm her ability to act decisively. She'd identified dozens of variables that needed consideration, spend precious seconds processing information that should have been acted upon instinctively, and miss engagement opportunities that less experienced pilots would have seized without hesitation. Her classmates began to notice. Tyler Brooks, a cocky pilot from Texas who'd excelled in every training exercise, made no effort to hide his contempt. "I don't know how Smith made it this far," he told a group of trainees during lunch. "She flies like she's scared of her own." Shadow, in combat, that hesitation would get ground troops killed. The criticism stung because Amanda knew it contained truth. She wasn't scared of the aircraft or the mission. She was paralyzed by her own need to analyze every situation to death. The very trait that had made her a successful transport pilot was destroying her chances of becoming a combat pilot. Major Chun tried different approaches to help Amanda overcome her problems. She assigned her to remedial simulator training, hoping that practice in a controlled environment would build confidence. But Amanda's issues weren't about aircraft handling or weapons systems. They were about decision-making under pressure. "Smith, you're thinking like an engineer when you need to think like a warrior," Chun said after another failed training session. "The A-10 is a simple aircraft designed for a simple mission. Find the enemy and destroy them. You're making it complicated when it doesn't need to be." Amanda understood the advice intellectually, but implementing it was another matter entirely. Her brain was wired to consider consequences, to analyze risks, to plan for contingencies. Asking her to stop thinking was like asking her to stop breathing. The criticism extended beyond her flying performance. During ground school sessions, Amanda would ask detailed questions about scenarios that other pilots considered straightforward. She'd want to know about rules of engagement in complex situations, about minimizing collateral damage, about distinguishing between legitimate targets and protected structures. "Smith, you're overthinking this," said Captain Robert Hayes, the tactics instructor. "Close air support is about speed and aggression. You identify hostile targets, you engage them, you move on to the next target. The ground commander will handle the complex decisions." But Amanda couldn't accept that simplistic approach. She'd seen the consequences of hasty decisions during her transport days: friendly fire incidents, civilian casualties, missions that succeeded tactically but failed strategically. She wanted to understand the broader context of every engagement, to consider the human cost of every trigger pull. This philosophical difference put her at odds with the entire training program. The A-10 curriculum was designed to produce pilots who could deliver immediate, decisive fire support to ground forces. It emphasized speed, aggression, and unwavering confidence in target identification. Amanda's careful, analytical approach was seen as a fundamental incompatibility with the mission. Her flight evaluations became increasingly harsh. Chun documented Amanda's inability to engage targets within acceptable time parameters, her tendency to abort attack runs due to excessive caution, and her failure to demonstrate the aggressive mindset required for close air support missions. Student pilot demonstrates excellent systems knowledge and aircraft handling skills, Chun wrote in one evaluation. However, she consistently fails to engage targets effectively due to analytical paralysis. Her decision-making process is too slow for combat operations, and her reluctance to commit to attack runs shows a lack of confidence inappropriate for this mission. The psychological pressure was intense. Amanda had never failed at anything she'd truly committed to achieving. She'd succeeded in transport aviation, had earned the respect of her peers and commanders, had built a reputation as a reliable and skilled pilot. Now she was facing the possibility that all her training and preparation had been for nothing. Sleep became elusive. Amanda would lie in her bunk replaying each failed training mission, analyzing what had gone wrong, planning how to do better next time. But her solutions always involved more analysis, more preparation, more thinking, exactly the opposite of what her instructors were demanding. Her roommate, Captain Maria Rodriguez, tried to offer support. "You're putting too much pressure on yourself," she said one evening as Amanda studied target identification charts for the 100th time. "Sometimes you just have to trust your instincts and pull the trigger." But Amanda's instincts were to think, to analyze, to consider all possibilities before acting. Those instincts had served her well in civilian emergency medical situations, where hasty decisions could be fatal. They'd made her an excellent transport pilot, where careful planning and risk assessment were essential skills. But in the aggressive world of combat aviation, those same instincts were being labeled as fatal flaws. The breaking point came during a complex training scenario designed to test pilots' ability to provide close air support in urban environments. The exercise involved multiple target types, legitimate military objectives, mixed with civilian structures and friendly forces. It was exactly the kind of scenario that required careful analysis and precise decision-making. Amanda entered the exercise area with her usual thorough briefing preparation. She'd studied the maps, memorized the radio frequencies, and developed a systematic approach to target identification. But as she began her attack run, the complexity of the scenario overwhelmed her analytical processes. She could see the designated targets clearly, but she could also see the potential for civilian casualties, the risk of friendly fire, the possibility of collateral damage. Her mind began processing all these variables simultaneously, creating a decision-making gridlock that left her flying in circles over the target area, without engaging anything. Hog 2-1, you have troops in contact requesting immediate support. The exercise controller announced. What's your status? Amanda tried to force herself to engage, but each potential target raised new questions in her mind. Was that really an enemy position or a civilian building? Were there friendly forces in the area that hadn't been properly marked? What would happen if she missed and her rounds hit the wrong target? Havdu 1, ground forces are taking heavy casualties. We need immediate fire support, the controller repeated, adding urgency to the simulated scenario. Amanda made 3 approaches to the target area without firing a single round. Each time, her analytical mind identified reasons to abort the attack. By the time she finally worked up the courage to engage, the exercise had been terminated for her failure to provide timely support. The debriefing was brutal. Chun's patience had finally reached its limit, and her evaluation was scathing. "Smith, this is the worst performance I've ever seen from a pilot at this level of training," she began. "You had multiple opportunities to engage legitimate targets and provide support to ground forces. Instead, you flew in circles for 15 minutes while simulated soldiers died because you couldn't make a decision." Amanda wanted to explain her reasoning, to describe the complex factors she'd been considering, to justify her careful approach. But she knew it would only confirm her instructor's worst fears about her suitability for combat aviation. "I'm recommending your immediate removal from the A-10 program," Chun concluded. "You don't have the temperament for this mission, and continued training would be a waste of resources." The recommendation would end Amanda's dream of flying the Warthog and likely terminate her combat aviation career entirely. She had one final chance to appeal the decision, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. She'd failed repeatedly, shown no improvement despite intensive remedial training, and demonstrated a fundamental inability to perform the mission she'd trained to execute. That night, Amanda sat in her quarters staring at the official documentation of her failure. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd dreamed of achieving, was about to be taken away because she couldn't stop thinking long enough to pull a trigger. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered with the cold efficiency of military bureaucracy. Amanda held the official Air Force correspondence in her trembling hands, knowing that the words inside would officially end her dream of becoming an A-10 pilot. "Captain Amanda Smith is hereby notified of her dismissal from the A-10 Thunderbolt II training program effective immediately," the letter began. "Due to inability to meet minimum performance standards in combat aviation, Captain Smith will be reassigned to non-combat duties pending further evaluation." Amanda read the letter 3 times, each reading making the reality more concrete. 8 weeks of intensive training, a lifetime of dreaming about flying the Warthog, years of working toward this moment, all of it reduced to a single paragraph of bureaucratic language. Her reassignment was to the 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Squadron at Keesler Air Force Base in Mississippi. She would be flying WC-130J Hurricane Hunters, aircraft that flew into the hearts of storms to gather meteorological data. It was important work, but it wasn't combat aviation. It wasn't the mission that had called to her soul. That the irony wasn't lost on Amanda. She was being transferred to a unit that valued exactly the kind of careful, methodical approach that had gotten her kicked out of A-10 training. Hurricane hunting required patience, precision, and the ability to analyze complex atmospheric conditions while flying through some of the most dangerous weather on Earth. But it wasn't what she'd sacrificed everything to achieve. The night before her departure from Davis-Monthan, Amanda sat in the base chapel, a small building that had become her refuge during the worst days of her training. The chapel was empty, except for a few scattered airmen seeking their own quiet moments of reflection. Amanda stared at the simple wooden cross at the front of the room, searching for answers that wouldn't come. She thought about her father's veterinary practice, where careful diagnosis and patient treatment were essential skills. She thought about her mother's guidance counseling, where understanding people's motivations was more important than quick judgments. Those approaches had worked in civilian life, but they'd been disasters in the military world of combat aviation. Maybe her instructors had been right all along. Maybe she was too soft, too analytical, too weak for the demands of air combat. Maybe her dream of flying the A-10 had been nothing more than a delusion, a misunderstanding of her own capabilities and limitations. Amanda pulled out her phone and scrolled through the contacts until she found Major Chun's number. Her finger hovered over the call button for several minutes before she finally pressed it. "Smith," Chun answered on the second ring. "I heard about your reassignment. How are you handling it?" "Ma'am, I wanted to apologize," Amanda said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I wasted your time and the Air Force's resources. I should have known I wasn't cut out for this mission." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Smith, you didn't waste anyone's time. You gave everything you had to this training program. Sometimes that's not enough, but it doesn't diminish the effort. I just ... I thought I could do it. I thought my experience would translate to combat flying. I was wrong. Your experience is valuable, Smith. It's just not valuable in the way you expected. The Air Force needs pilots who can think carefully under pressure, who can analyze complex situations, who can make decisions based on incomplete information. You have those skills. They're just better suited to different missions." Amanda appreciated Chun's attempt at consolation, but it felt hollow. She'd been preparing for combat aviation her entire military career. Everything else felt like a consolation prize, a participation trophy for someone who couldn't handle the real mission. After ending the call, Amanda walked outside and found herself drawn to the flight line where rows of A-10s sat in the desert darkness. She'd spent countless hours studying these aircraft, memorizing their systems, dreaming about the missions they would fly together. Now they looked like monuments to her failure. She approached her favorite aircraft, tail number 810965, a Warthog that had seen combat in both Iraq and Afghanistan. The maintenance crew had nicknamed it Desert Storm for its sand-colored camouflage and its reputation for surviving damage that would have destroyed other aircraft. Amanda had hoped to fly this particular A-10 in combat, had imagined herself in the cockpit providing life-saving support to ground forces. Now someone else would fly Desert Storm. Someone faster, more aggressive, more willing to pull the trigger without hesitation. Someone who belonged in the cockpit of a combat aircraft. Amanda placed her hand on the aircraft's titanium armor, feeling the cold metal beneath her palm. The A-10 was built to survive, to keep flying even when damaged, to bring its pilot home safely. But it was also built to fight, to deliver devastating firepower when called upon. She'd mastered the survival part, but had failed completely at the fighting part. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her roommate Maria. "Heard about the reassignment. Want to grab coffee and talk?" Amanda ignored the message. She wasn't ready to discuss her failure with anyone, wasn't ready to pretend that hurricane hunting was an acceptable substitute for the mission she'd trained for. She just wanted to be alone with her disappointment and the aircraft that would never be hers. The next morning, Amanda packed her belongings with mechanical efficiency. Her A-10 training manuals went into a box marked storage. She couldn't bear to throw them away, but she also couldn't stand to look at them anymore. Her flight suit with the A-10 patches would be replaced by a Hurricane Hunter uniform. Her dreams of close air support missions would be replaced by weather reconnaissance flights. As she loaded her car for the drive to Mississippi, Amanda received a visit from an unexpected source. Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Williams, the deputy commander of the 355th Wing, appeared at her quarters just as Amanda was closing her trunk. "Captain Smith," Williams said, "I wanted to speak with you before you left." Amanda straightened and saluted. "Ma'am, I've been reviewing your training records," Williams continued. "Your performance was ... disappointing, but I also noticed something interesting in your background. You mentioned during your initial interview that you'd witnessed an A-10 save 37 Marines in Syria. Do you remember that incident?" Amanda nodded, wondering where this conversation was heading. The pilot of that A-10 was Captain Rachel Torres. She's now a major stationed at Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan. I spoke with her yesterday about your case. Williams paused, studying Amanda's reaction. "Torres told me something interesting about that mission. She said the reason she was able to save those Marines wasn't because she was fast or aggressive. It was because she took the time to understand the tactical situation, to coordinate carefully with ground forces, to make sure every shot counted." Amanda felt a flicker of something, not hope exactly, but curiosity about where this was leading. Torres also told me that her most successful close air support missions weren't the ones where she engaged targets quickly. Williams continued. They were the ones where she took time to think, to analyze the situation, to make sure she was helping rather than hindering the ground forces. Ma'am, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I've already failed the training program. I'm not cut out for combat flying. Williams smiled slightly. Smith, the A-10 training program is designed to produce pilots for conventional combat operations. But there are other missions, other requirements, other ways to serve in combat aviation. The question is whether you're willing to consider alternatives to the path you originally envisioned. Amanda looked at Williams with confusion. Ma'am, I don't understand. Report to Building 1947 at 0800 tomorrow morning, Williams said. There's someone there who wants to meet you. Someone who thinks your analytical approach might be exactly what a particular mission requires. With that cryptic statement, Williams walked away, leaving Amanda standing beside her packed car with more questions than answers. She'd been ready to drive away from Davis Monthan in defeat, ready to accept that her combat aviation dreams were over. Now she had a choice to make: continue with her planned departure to hurricane hunting, or take one more chance at a mission she didn't understand. Amanda looked back at the flight line where the A-10s set in the morning sun. She'd failed to prove herself worthy of flying them in conventional combat. But maybe, just maybe, there was another way to serve the mission she'd always wanted to fly. She put her car keys back in her pocket and walked toward Building 1947, not knowing what awaited her but willing to find out. Sometimes the end of one dream was just the beginning of Building 1947 was tucked away in a remote corner of Davis Monthan Air Force Base, far from the main flight line and training facilities. Amanda had never noticed it during her 8 weeks of A-10 training. The nondescript concrete structure looked like a dozen other administrative buildings on base, but as she approached the entrance at 0800 sharp, she noticed something unusual. The windows were heavily tinted, and there were more security cameras than seemed necessary for a routine office building. Serious-looking Air Force security policemen checked Amanda's identification twice before allowing her through the entrance. Inside, the building felt different from typical military facilities. The hallways were quieter, the lighting was softer, and the few personnel she encountered wore uniforms without standard unit patches or name tapes. Captain Smith, a woman in civilian clothes, approached from down the hallway. She appeared to be in her early 40s, with short brown hair and the kind of confident bearing that suggested significant authority despite her unremarkable appearance. I'm Dr. Sarah Mitchell. Thank you for coming. Amanda followed Dr. Mitchell through a maze of corridors that seemed unnecessarily complex for such a small building. They passed several doors marked with generic labels like Conference Room B and Storage, but Amanda noticed that each door required keycard access and some had additional biometric scanners. Dr. Mitchell, can you tell me what this is about? Amanda asked as they walked. Colonel Williams was rather vague about why I'm here. All your questions will be answered shortly, Mitchell replied with a slight smile. But first, I need to know, are you interested in flying combat missions, or are you committed to flying the A-10 specifically? The question caught Amanda off guard. Ma'am, I've always wanted to fly close air support missions. The A-10 was just the best platform for that mission. But I've already failed A-10 training. That's what I was hoping to hear, Mitchell said as they approached a door marked Conference Room Alpha. She placed her hand on a biometric scanner, and the door clicked open. After you. Inside the conference room, Amanda was surprised to find 3 other people waiting. The first was a man in Army fatigues with colonel's insignia and Special Forces patches. The second was a woman in Air Force uniform with major's rank and aircrew wings. The third was another civilian, a man in his 50s wearing a suit that looked expensive enough to suggest he wasn't a typical government employee. Captain Smith, Dr. Mitchell began. Let me introduce Colonel David Patterson, Army Special Operations Command. Major Linda Foster, 24th Special Operations Squadron. And Mr. James Crawford from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Amanda shook hands with each person, noting that Major Foster's uniform bore patches from units she didn't recognize. The 24th Special Operations Squadron wasn't a unit she'd heard of during her conventional training. Captain Smith, Colonel Patterson began. We've been following your progress through A-10 training with great interest. Your failures in conventional combat aviation have actually highlighted exactly the qualities we're looking for in a very different kind of mission. Dr. Mitchell activated a large display screen that showed what appeared to be a modified A-10 Warthog. But this aircraft looked different from any A-10 Amanda had seen. The fuselage was sleeker, the engines were quieter looking, and there were additional sensors and equipment pods mounted in various locations. This is the A-10C Precision Strike variant, Major Foster explained. It's a highly classified modification of the standard Warthog, designed for special operations missions that require extreme precision and extended loiter time over sensitive areas. Amanda studied the aircraft on the screen. It retained the A-10's distinctive twin-engine configuration and forward-mounted cannon, but everything else had been refined and upgraded. The cockpit appeared to have advanced displays and sensor systems far beyond what she'd trained on. The mission profile is completely different from conventional close air support, Dr. Mitchell continued. Instead of responding to immediate requests for fire support, the A-10C operates as a persistent surveillance and precision strike platform. The pilot spends hours over a target area, gathering intelligence, tracking enemy movements, and making very selective engagements when conditions are optimal. Mr. Crawford from DARPA leaned forward. The key difference is time, Captain Smith. Instead of having seconds to make engagement decisions, A-10C pilots have minutes or even hours to analyze situations, plan their attacks, and coordinate with ground forces. The mission requires exactly the kind of careful, methodical approach that made you unsuccessful in conventional training. Amanda felt her heart rate increase. This sounded like the mission she'd always dreamed of: precision. Close air support that prioritized accuracy over speed, careful analysis over immediate action. What kind of missions are we talking about? She asked. Colonel Patterson pulled up a series of photographs on the display. They showed various combat scenarios: urban environments, mountainous terrain, dense forests, hostage rescue operations, counter-terrorism missions, special reconnaissance, situations where standard close air support would be too risky or imprecise. The A-10C pilot becomes an intelligence gatherer, a battlefield coordinator, and a precision strike asset all in one, Major Foster added. You might spend 6 hours over a target area, watching, learning, waiting for the perfect moment to act. When you finally engage, it has to be absolutely perfect, because you typically only get one chance. Amanda realized that everything about this mission aligned with her natural approach to flying. The careful analysis, the extended planning time, the emphasis on precision over speed. These were the exact qualities that had gotten her kicked out of conventional A-10 training. "Why me?" she asked. "There have to be other pilots who could do this mission." Dr. Mitchell smiled. "We've been looking for the right pilot for this program for over a year. We need someone with excellent technical skills, proven ability to handle complex aircraft systems, and most importantly, the temperament to think carefully under pressure. Your A-10 training records show that you have all of those qualities. But I failed the training program," Amanda protested. "I couldn't hit targets consistently. I couldn't make quick decisions. I froze up under pressure." "You froze up under the wrong kind of pressure," Colonel Patterson corrected. "The conventional A-10 mission creates artificial time pressure that doesn't exist in special operations. Our missions require pilots who can resist the urge to act quickly, who can gather information patiently, who can wait for the optimal moment to engage. Major Foster pulled up another display showing a mission timeline. Look at this actual mission. Profile. The pilot launched at 0200 hours and didn't make his first engagement until 0745. He spent over 5 hours observing, coordinating, and planning. When he finally engaged, he took out 3 high-value targets with 3 precise shots, enabling a successful hostage rescue. That's the kind of mission temperament we need, Dr. Mitchell added. Someone who can sit in a cockpit for hours, processing information, making careful decisions, and executing with surgical precision when the moment is right. Amanda studied the mission profile, realizing that this was exactly the kind of flying she'd always envisioned. Not the rapid-fire engagement of conventional combat, but the patient, methodical approach of a skilled surgeon applying deadly precision. To save lives, what would the training involve? She asked. 6 months of intensive instruction at a classified facility, Mr. Crawford explained. You'd learn to operate the A-10's advanced sensors, coordinate with Special Operations Ground teams, and develop the skills needed for long-duration precision missions. The training is completely different from what you experienced in conventional A-10 school. And if I succeed? Amanda asked. You'd be assigned to the 24th Special Operations Squadron, Major Foster said. You'd fly missions that you'll never be able to discuss with anyone, but missions that directly save American lives in the most dangerous situations imaginable. Dr. Mitchell leaned back in her chair. Captain Smith, we're not offering you a second chance at conventional combat aviation. We're offering you a chance at a completely different kind of mission, one that requires exactly the skills that made you unsuccessful in standard training. Amanda looked around the room at the faces of people who seemed to understand her in a way that her previous instructors never had. They weren't asking her to change her approach or overcome her analytical nature. They were asking her to use those supposed weaknesses as strengths. I have one question, Amanda said. Why is this mission so important that you've developed an entirely new aircraft and training program for it? Colonel Patterson and Dr. Mitchell exchanged glances before Patterson answered. Because conventional close air support can't handle the missions we're facing. We need pilots who can operate in environments where one wrong shot means civilian casualties, where patience is more important than speed, where thinking too much is better than thinking too little. The world is changing, Captain Smith, Dr. Mitchell added. The enemy is hiding among civilians, operating in urban environments, using human shields and complex tactics. We need pilots who can see through that complexity, who can wait for the right moment, who can deliver precision when precision is the only acceptable outcome. Amanda realized that this was the opportunity she'd been unconsciously preparing for her entire career. Her transport experience had taught her patience and careful decision-making. Her failed A-10 training had shown her the importance of taking time to analyze complex situations. Even her childhood experiences with her veterinarian father had prepared her for missions that required surgical precision. When would training start? She asked. Tomorrow, if you're willing, Major Foster replied. We have a training slot available, and frankly, we've been waiting for the right pilot to fill it. Amanda looked at the modified A-10 on the display screen, imagining herself in the cockpit of an aircraft designed specifically for the kind of mission she'd always dreamed of flying. This wasn't a consolation prize or a second chance at conventional combat aviation. This was something entirely new, something that required exactly the skills she'd developed over her military career. I'm in, she said, feeling more confident than she had in months. Dr. Mitchell smiled. Welcome to the Precision Strike program, Captain Smith. I think you're going to find that everything you've learned up to this point has been preparation for this mission. As Amanda left Building 1947 that morning, she realized that her failure in conventional A-10 training hadn't been the end of her combat aviation dreams. It had been the beginning of something far more important, a mission that would use her supposed weaknesses as her greatest strengths. 6 months later, Amanda stood on the tarmac at Creech Air Force Base in Nevada, staring at her assigned A-10 OC precision strike aircraft. The sleek, modified Warthog bore the tail number 870127 and had been nicknamed Guardian Angel by its previous pilot. The aircraft's matte gray finish and advanced sensor pods made it look like a predator from the future, but Amanda knew it was designed for protection, not destruction. The specialized training at the classified facility had transformed Amanda from a failed conventional pilot into something entirely new. She'd learned to operate the A-10's advanced targeting systems, coordinate with special operations ground teams, and most importantly, develop the patience required for missions that could last 8 hours or more over hostile territory. Instructor, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, had been a veteran special operations pilot who understood the unique demands of precision strike missions. Unlike her previous instructors who had criticized her analytical approach, Webb had encouraged her to think deeply, plan carefully, and take whatever time was necessary to ensure perfect execution. "Smith, your greatest asset isn't your flying skills," Webb had told her during training. "It's your ability to see the battlefield as a complex system rather than a collection of individual targets. That perspective will save lives when conventional pilots would just create more chaos." Now, Amanda was about to put that training to the ultimate test. The mission briefing had been unlike anything she'd experienced during conventional training. Instead of simple target coordinates and engagement parameters, Amanda had been given a complex intelligence package that read like a thriller novel. 37 Marines from the 2nd Reconnaissance Battalion were trapped in a valley in eastern Afghanistan, surrounded by Taliban forces who had used the mountainous terrain to cut off all escape routes. The Marines had been conducting a reconnaissance mission when they'd stumbled into a Taliban stronghold that intelligence reports had failed to identify. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. The Taliban forces had the Marines pinned down in a small compound, and reinforcements were arriving every hour. Apache helicopters couldn't reach the area due to the high altitude and dangerous terrain. F-16s had been ruled out because the targets were too close to the Marines' position. Even conventional A-10s were considered too risky because of the complex terrain and the proximity of friendly forces. This is exactly the kind of mission the A-10C was designed for, Major Foster had explained during the briefing. You'll have unlimited loiter time, advanced sensors to track enemy movements, and the precision weapons needed to engage targets within meters of our ground forces. But the mission came with complications that made Amanda's training exercises look simple by comparison. The valley was surrounded by civilian villages, some of which might be harboring Taliban fighters, but others which definitely contained innocent families. The terrain was a maze of caves, rocky outcroppings, and narrow passages that provided perfect hiding spots for enemy forces. Most challenging of all, the Marines were running low on ammunition and medical supplies. They had wounded soldiers who needed immediate evacuation, but no helicopter could reach them until the surrounding Taliban forces were eliminated. "Guardian Angel, this is Reaper Base," came the voice of the mission commander through Amanda's headset as she flew toward the target area. "You are cleared to proceed to the operational area. Ground forces are designated as Wolfpack 1 through Wolfpack 37. They are surrounded and taking sporadic fire from multiple directions." Amanda acknowledged the transmission and began her approach to the combat zone. The flight from Creech to Afghanistan had taken 12 hours, but Amanda felt alert and focused. The A-10C's advanced life support systems and ergonomic cockpit design allowed pilots to remain effective during extended missions that would exhaust conventional aircraft operators. As she approached the valley, Amanda activated the A-10C's advanced sensor suite. The aircraft's multispectral imaging system immediately began painting a detailed picture of the battlefield below. She could see the Marines' position clearly, a small compound surrounded by defensive positions they'd hastily constructed. But more importantly, she could see the Taliban forces that had them surrounded. The enemy positions were cleverly concealed and strategically placed. Taliban fighters had positioned themselves in caves and behind rock formations that provided excellent cover while giving them overlapping fields of fire on the Marines' position. Traditional close air support would have been nearly impossible without risking friendly casualties. "Guardian Angel, this is Wolfpack Actual," came a strained voice through the radio. "We've got eyes on your bird. Thank God you're here. We've been taking fire from multiple positions for the past 6 hours. We've got 4 wounded and we're down to our last magazines." Amanda acknowledged the transmission and began her methodical analysis of the battlefield. This was exactly what she'd been trained for, not the rapid engagement of conventional combat, but the patient, systematic approach of a surgical strike specialist. She spent the first hour simply observing, using the A-10's sensors to map every Taliban position, track their movement patterns, and identify their command structure. The aircraft's advanced cameras could distinguish between armed fighters and civilians, between active combatants and support personnel. What Amanda discovered was more complex than the initial intelligence had suggested. The Taliban forces weren't just randomly positioned around the valley. They were part of a coordinated defensive network that had been planned and prepared over months or possibly years. This wasn't an accidental encounter with a reconnaissance patrol. This was a carefully orchestrated ambush. "Guardian Angel, we're taking heavy fire from the North Ridge," Wolfpack Actual reported. "Can you engage those positions?" Amanda could see the Taliban fighters on the North Ridge clearly, and she could have engaged them immediately. But her training had taught her to see beyond the immediate threat. She noticed that the fighters on the North Ridge were deliberately exposing themselves, drawing attention away from other positions that were maneuvering to flank the Marines. "Wolfpack Actual, I see the North Ridge positions, but I'm tracking additional movement to your east and south. Stand by while I develop the full picture." Amanda continued her analysis, identifying not just the obvious threats, but the hidden ones as well. She discovered Taliban fighters moving through cave systems that connected different parts of the valley, allowing them to coordinate attacks and share resources. She identified a command post hidden in a civilian village that was directing the entire operation. Most importantly, she realized that the Taliban were trying to force the Marines into a specific area of the valley where they had prepared a kill zone. The apparent escape routes were actually traps designed to channel the Marines into an area where they could be eliminated with minimal risk to the Taliban forces. "Guardian Angel, what's your status?" came the voice of the mission commander from Reaper Base. "Ground forces are requesting immediate fire support." Amanda understood the pressure to engage immediately, but her training had taught her that patience was often the key to success in complex operations. She spent another hour tracking Taliban movements, identifying their tactical plan, and developing a comprehensive engagement strategy. What she discovered was that the Taliban forces were vulnerable, but only if engaged in a specific sequence. That would disrupt their command structure and prevent them from adapting to her attacks. Conventional close air support would have eliminated some threats while allowing others to reposition and continue the fight. "Wolfpack Actual, Guardian Angel," Amanda finally transmitted. "I've identified 17 separate Taliban positions and their command structure. I'm going to engage them in sequence, starting with their communications node and working outward. This will take time, but it will eliminate the threat systematically." "Guardian Angel, we don't have time for systematic," Wolfpack Actual replied, his voice strained with fatigue and stress. "We need fire support now." Amanda understood the Marines' desperation, but she also understood that hasty action would likely make the situation worse. The Taliban had positioned themselves specifically to take advantage of conventional close air support tactics. They were expecting rapid, aggressive attacks that would allow them to adapt and counterattack. Wolfpack Actual, trust me, Amanda said. I'm going to get you out of there, but I need to do it the right way. Amanda began her engagement sequence with the Taliban command post, hidden in the civilian village. Using the A-10's precision-guided munitions, she delivered a single, carefully aimed strike that eliminated the command structure while avoiding the surrounding civilian buildings. The effect was immediate. Taliban forces throughout the valley lost their coordination, and their disciplined defensive positions began to break down. Amanda capitalized on the confusion by systematically engaging key positions that were critical to the Taliban's defensive network. Each engagement was precise, calculated, and devastating. Amanda would spend 15 to 20 minutes analyzing each target, planning her approach, and coordinating with the Marines to ensure their safety. When she finally engaged, her shots were perfect, eliminating threats while avoiding friendly forces and civilian casualties. Guardian Angel, this is incredible, Wolfpack Actual transmitted after Amanda's fifth engagement. You're picking them off one by one, and they can't figure out how to respond. Keep it up. Amanda continued her methodical approach, spending over 6 hours above the valley, systematically dismantling the Taliban defensive network. Her patient, analytical approach had turned a desperate situation into a controlled, surgical operation that saved the Marines while minimizing collateral damage. As the sun began to set over the Afghan valley, Amanda had eliminated 17 Taliban positions and cleared multiple escape routes for the surrounded Marines. Her careful, methodical approach, the same approach that had gotten her kicked out of conventional A-10 training, had proven to be exactly what this mission required. Guardian Angel, Wolfpack Actual, came the final transmission from the 5th Marines. All positions are secure. We're moving to the extraction point now. You saved 37 lives today. Amanda smiled as she began her flight back to base, knowing that she had finally found the mission that matched her unique skills and approach to combat aviation. The debrief at Creech Air Force Base was unlike any Amanda had experienced during her military career. Instead of criticism and analysis of her failures, she sat in a room full of senior officers and intelligence analysts who were studying her success with fascination and respect. Captain Smith, General Robert Hayes, commander of Air Combat Command, began as he reviewed the mission footage on the large display screen. In 26 years of military service, I've never seen a single aircraft mission that so completely changed the tactical situation for ground forces. You didn't just provide close air support, you conducted a strategic dismantling of an enemy defensive network. The mission footage was remarkable to watch. Amanda's helmet camera had recorded the entire 6-hour engagement, showing her methodical analysis of each Taliban position, her careful coordination with the Marines, and her precision strikes that eliminated threats while avoiding civilian casualties. The contrast between her approach and conventional close air support was stark and undeniable. The tactical intelligence you gathered during this mission has already been distributed to special operations units throughout the theater, added Colonel Patterson, who had flown in from Afghanistan specifically for this debriefing. Your analysis of the Taliban's defensive network revealed preparation and coordination that we hadn't detected through conventional intelligence methods. Amanda had spent the flight back from Afghanistan thinking about the mission, replaying each engagement in her mind. She'd felt a satisfaction and sense of purpose that had been missing during her failed conventional training. Every shot had been deliberate, every decision had been calculated, and every outcome had been precisely what she'd intended. "Ma'am, I did what I was trained to do," Amanda replied. The mission required patience and precision rather than speed and aggression. The A-10 program prepared me for exactly that type of engagement. Major Foster leaned forward from her position at the conference table. "Smith, what you accomplished goes beyond following your training. You demonstrated an understanding of battlefield dynamics that most pilots never develop. You saw the enemy's tactical plan and countered it systematically rather than reactively. The mission's success had created ripple effects throughout the special operations community. The 37 Marines Amanda had rescued were already back in action, and their commander had submitted a recommendation for Amanda to receive the Distinguished Flying Cross. More importantly, the mission had validated the entire A-10 Precision Strike program. Captain Smith, General Hayes continued, your success has confirmed something we've suspected for years, that the future of close air support requires a different approach than what we've traditionally used. The enemy has adapted to our conventional tactics, but they haven't adapted to the methodical, analytical approach you demonstrated." Dr. Mitchell, who had been quietly taking notes throughout the debriefing, finally spoke up. "Amanda, your mission has generated requests from special operations units around the world. Everyone wants an A-10 pilot who can provide the kind of precision support you delivered. You've created a new standard for what close air support can accomplish." Amanda felt a sense of vindication that was both satisfying and humbling. The analytical approach that had gotten her kicked out of conventional training had proven to be exactly what modern combat required. Her supposed weakness had become her greatest strength, but more importantly, it had become a capability that could save lives in situations where conventional approaches failed. "What happens now?" Amanda asked. General Hayes smiled. "Now you become the instructor for the next generation of precision strike pilots. We're expanding the A-10 program, and we need someone who can teach other pilots how to think the way you think, how to see the battlefield the way you see it." The assignment was perfect. Amanda would be promoted to major and assigned to lead the A-10 training program at the classified facility where she'd learned her new skills. She would teach other pilots, many of whom would likely be washouts from conventional programs, how to use their analytical nature as a weapon rather than a weakness. "There's something else," Dr. Mitchell added. "We've received a letter that I think you should see." She handed Amanda an envelope with familiar handwriting. Inside was a letter from Sergeant First Class Michael Torres, the ground commander of the Marines she'd rescued in Afghanistan. "Major Smith," the letter began, "I know you're probably getting a lot of recognition for what you did in that valley, but I wanted you to know what it meant from the perspective of the guys on the ground. When you first arrived, we were desperate. We'd been fighting for hours, we were running out of ammunition, and we had wounded soldiers who needed medical attention. We expected you to come in guns blazing like the A-10s we'd worked with before. Instead, you did something that probably saved all our lives. You took the time to understand what we were facing, to see the bigger picture, to plan a solution rather than just react to the immediate threat. When you finally started engaging targets, it was like watching a surgeon operate. Every shot was perfect, every decision was calculated, and every outcome was exactly what we needed. My Marines talk about you all the time. They call you the Guardian Angel, not because of your aircraft's nickname, but because you watched over us with the patience and precision that only comes from someone who truly understands the value of the lives they're protecting. You didn't just save us, you showed us what close air support can be when it's done by someone who cares more about getting it right than getting it done fast. Thank you for taking the time to think, to plan, and to execute with the precision that brought 37 Marines home safely. You've given us a new standard for what we expect from our air support, and more importantly, you've shown us that sometimes the best pilots are the ones who think too much rather than too little." Amanda finished reading the letter with tears in her eyes. This was the validation she'd been seeking throughout her military career, not the approval of instructors or the recognition of superior officers, but the gratitude of the people she'd protected through her careful, methodical approach. "There's one more thing," General Hayes said. The pilot who inspired you to pursue A-10 training, Major Rachel Torres, has requested to meet with you. She's been following your career, and she wants to congratulate you personally for proving that there's more than one way to be an effective combat pilot. The meeting with Major Torres took place the following week at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, where Amanda had failed conventional A-10 training just over a year earlier. Torres was exactly what Amanda had expected: confident, professional, and completely comfortable with her role as a combat pilot. "Smith," Torres said as they walked along the flight line where Amanda had once struggled with basic training exercises, "I heard about your mission in Afghanistan. What you accomplished in that valley was extraordinary, but what impressed me most was your patience. You could have engaged targets immediately, but you took the time to understand the situation completely before acting." Amanda looked at the A-10s parked on the flight line, the same aircraft she'd dreamed of flying but had been unable to master using conventional approaches. "Ma'am, I spent months thinking I was too weak for combat flying. It turns out I was just being prepared for a different kind of combat." "That's exactly right," Torres replied. "The mission you flew is the future of close air support. The enemy has adapted to our traditional tactics, but they haven't adapted to pilots who can think strategically while flying tactically. You've shown that analytical thinking isn't a weakness, it's a weapon." 3 months later, Amanda stood in front of her first class of A-10C precision strike students at the classified training facility. The 12 pilots in front of her were a mix of conventional training washouts and experienced pilots who had requested transfer to the Special Operations mission. "Welcome to Precision Strike Training," Amanda began. "You're here because someone has identified you as having the potential to think differently about close air support. Some of you have been told that you're too slow, too careful, or too analytical for conventional combat flying. I'm here to tell you that those supposed weaknesses are exactly what this mission requires." She activated the display screen, showing footage from her Afghanistan mission. "This is what precision strike looks like in combat. Notice that I spend more time analyzing than engaging, more time planning than executing. That's not hesitation, that's precision. That's the difference between providing fire support and providing intelligent fire support." Amanda looked around. The room had faces that reminded her of herself a year earlier, pilots who had been told they didn't have the right temperament for combat aviation, who had been criticized for thinking too much, who had been made to feel like failures because they couldn't adapt to conventional approaches. "For the next 6 months," she continued, "you're going to learn that thinking too much isn't a weakness. It's exactly what separates good pilots from great pilots. You're going to learn that patience isn't hesitation, it's the key to precision. And you're going to learn that the analytical approach that got you kicked out of conventional training is exactly what this mission requires." As Amanda looked at her students, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She'd been called too weak for combat, too slow for close air support, too analytical for military aviation. But those criticisms had been based on a narrow definition of what combat pilots should be. The A-10C program had shown her that there was room in military aviation for pilots who thought differently, who approached problems analytically, who valued precision over speed. Her success in Afghanistan had proven that sometimes the best combat pilots were the ones who refused to rush, who took time to understand complex situations, who saw protecting lives as more important than simply engaging targets. Amanda had found her purpose not by overcoming her analytical nature, but by embracing it. She'd discovered that the qualities that made her a failure in conventional training made her exactly what special operations needed in precision strike aviation. The woman who had once been called too weak for combat had become the standard by which precision strike pilots were measured. And she was just getting started. Guardian Angel was more than just an aircraft nickname, it was a mission, philosophy that Amanda would spend the rest of her career teaching to pilots who had been told they weren't cut out for combat aviation. Because sometimes the people who think too much are exactly the people the world needs most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.